Joining me now is the 2nd District Congressman for the state of Arkansas, Representative French Hill. Good to have you with us again. Congressman Hill, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Roby. I appreciate the invitation as always.
Let us talk about what the week has been like in Washington, D.C. I believe you've gotten a little bit back into some of the committee work that is the normal course of business in Congress, yet on the other end of the Capitol, there is an impeachment trial going on. What has been the atmosphere in Washington this week? Has that impeachment trial dominated some of the conversation in Washington from your perspective?
Well, Roby, it's interesting because the House is not in session this week except for committee work. So I spent the last couple of days in Washington intensively in debate for yesterday. I guess it went for probably 7 or 8 hours. So a lot of that has been sort of caught out of the corner of your eye when you're walking past the television screen in the afternoon. We were debating Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion additional spending. But yes, of course, members of the House are interested in the debate in the Senate on Donald Trump's second impeachment. They're interested in it because they've heard the House managers allegations now, and they're very interested as we tape this show and hearing the president's defense.
Did you hear anything out of either catch out of the corner of your eye or that you've read up on in response? Anything in the House managers' case that you found compelling?
Well, I think they're alleging that the president's rhetoric and plan was, very much a premeditated environment to cause criminal riot and insurrection in the Capitol. These are not new arguments, and I suspect that the Trump defense attorneys in the Senate will focus on the First Amendment protections and also the other things that we've learned about the riot since January 6th. Personally, the reason I didn't vote for the snap impeachment was twofold. One, there was no opportunity for debate or real discussion on a bipartisan basis about it at all. It was put on the floor by Speaker Pelosi. It was done virtually overnight based on not knowing the full facts and circumstances precisely as to what happened on January 6th. So there was no thinking it through or doing any additional research or criminal reviews. And then finally was this issue of the First Amendment, where you have a broad First Amendment right in this country, both politicians and non-politicians. And if a speech that is extremely expressive and demonstrative on any topic is impeachable, I think there are a lot of politicians across this country that should be very concerned. So in my view, I think that's where the defense will turn, is talking through that First Amendment application.
Just to play devil's advocate with you, and I'd like to move on to some other topics here, but most of that demonstrative speech that you're talking about did not lead to people storming the Capitol and threatening the lives of congressional members and killing a Capitol police officer, as well as others that died or were injured in that. So I mean, it does seem to me that it has risen to a level much further than what we typically see in political rhetoric or speech.
Well, it was certainly horrific on January 6th. We've heard a lot of speech from the left that some people believe incited the man that came to the baseball field in June of 2017 to kill Republican baseball team members, including the number 2 person in the House, Steve Scalise. And that was another horrible, violent day in Washington. So my advice is, look, people are responsible for their words. They need to keep those in perspective. And that while we value free speech in this country, we don't infringe on it, people need to be careful with the kind of rhetoric that they use.
Yeah, again, talking about a lone ranger at that baseball field versus a crowd that rioted. But let's move on to our some economic topics here. You've been critical of President Biden's $1.9 trillion plan to deal with COVID-19, stimulate the economy. Tell me what some of your objections are to that proposal.
Well, we've put in between March and December of 2020, we've appropriated $4 trillion to get our economy reopened and fight COVID-19. $4 trillion is almost what we spend in an entire year to fund the entire federal government. It's about 18% of our GDP has been appropriated for COVID-19. In that most recent bill that we all agreed to on a bipartisan basis that was signed into law by President Trump in December, there's over $1 trillion that has not yet been spent in our states for health, vaccine, schools, small business relief, and all the other priorities that Congress on a bipartisan basis outlined.
Let me
So my
interrupt you
first-
here for just a second. Is that because the Trump administration did not deploy that money fast enough? It hasn't been spent. Is it the Asa Hutchinson administration is not spending this money as Congress intended it to? Who's responsible for that money not being spent?
Well, some of it was staged to be spent and has not been spent. Some of it was blocked by Speaker Pelosi from being spent until December by her holding up paycheck protection from the first week in August until the last week of December. But that bill in December, Roby, had $900 billion in it, almost $1 trillion that was to be deployed and is being deployed for 2 weeks by the Trump administration. And since then, about a month by the Biden administration, and it's still being distributed. Things like rental assistance were to be gotten to the states by January 31st. And so that program money is just now getting to our governors to help landlords and tenants with rental assistance. My whole point is, my first objection is that we have almost $1 trillion that has not been realized in the economy out of something that's already an 18% stimulus in the GDP, much larger than any other country in the world and much larger than the economic gap that we're facing. Second point, Larry Summers, a former Treasury Secretary, advisor to both President Clinton and President Obama, also rejects the $1.9 trillion number proposed by President Biden. He says it's too large, maybe 3 to 4 times too large. His estimate of the output gap in 2021 as we bring vaccines to bear and as the economy reopens. I mean, America's expected to have a positive GDP this year of about 5.5% prior to the Biden proposal of 1.9 trillion in new spending.
Let's talk about, you've been critical of the Biden executive order to shut down the Keystone Pipeline project. That obviously affects some jobs here in Central Arkansas at Wellspun Pipes. I think there are some Northeast Arkansas jobs that could be impacted by that as well. I think you've outlined those arguments pretty thoroughly in reporting that we've done and through some of the other press outlets there. Tell me where you are finding something in common with the Biden administration that you agree with their direction on some things. Is there some places where you see common ground?
On the subject of climate, or what topic?
Well, not on the pipeline topic, obviously,
Okay,
because
sure.
you're going to be opposed to that. But I'm talking about just in general, as you've seen President Biden rolling out some of his plans for his administration. What are some things that you go, I can get behind that? Maybe immigration, it may be green energy. I don't know. I'm curious as to where you think you see some places for common ground.
Well, Joe Biden campaigned on unity. He campaigned on bringing both sides together in Washington. He said he'd been doing that for 47 years. But in that first few weeks of his administration with 40 executive orders, he's really gone down a box checking list of very progressive, very Bernie Sanders friendly policy ideas. So I will just be more general to say, there is work to be done in the following areas where I think Republicans can work with the Biden administration if he will engage with Republicans, which I haven't seen any evidence of yet. First, what do we replace the Iran failed JCPOA deal with, the Iran deal negotiated by then Secretary Kerry and Barack Obama? The Biden administration is saying they're not going to go back into that deal. That's good. So how are we going to rein in the world's top nuclear developer and one of the world's top state sponsors of terror? So that's an area where I think Republicans want to work with the Biden administration. Expanding Donald Trump's success in trade is something Republicans have an interest in, both an EU free trade agreement and completing a UK free trade agreement are priorities for Republicans, and I believe will be priorities for the Biden administration. Immigration, we need to see places where we can find common ground instead of just poking again at either the Obama policy or the Trump policy. Let's see if Joe Biden has an original approach to keeping the border secure and curing some of the intractable problems we have with our existing immigration system. So there's a lot to do, and I hope President Biden will reach out to Republicans for ideas.
Do you think President Biden needs to reach out to Republicans? Do you think Republicans should reach out to President Biden? Because he has met with Republican Senate leadership in his first week in office. I think he met with them before he met with Democrats, quite frankly. But on the House side, how could that get instigated from your perspective?
Well, we've reached out. We've talked to their legislative affairs people. They know our interest in many areas. A lot of people in the Biden administration know Republicans well on the House side. I think Joe Biden reached out to Senate Democrats because he's got to have their votes. And they were along the lines of my views about the $1.9 trillion, Larry Summers' views about the $1.9 trillion, the CBO views on the $1.9 trillion. They think it should be smaller, targeted, and much more narrowly crafted than what the administration is proposing.
He is Representative French Hill, represents the 2nd District of Arkansas. We could probably go on for another hour and a half. I'm just not sure if anybody would stay with us and talk and listen to all of that. Congressman, I appreciate you very much.
Sure,
Thank you
Roby.
for being with us.
Thanks.